Hey yo, what's happening, YouTubes? This is Trent, and I like to make indie games. Mostly I work on AAA games. I'm a concept artist, and but I have been teaching myself to program the last few years. I want to share a little bit of the process with you on a project I've been working on. In this case, I'm going to be showing you a stage that I've been developing for my indie game. It's called Ikeda the Scrap Hunter, and I want to talk you through the whole process of what I go through when I'm putting together a stage, how I do game design for it, and how I mock up the artwork. And I'm not going to go too much into the actual code for it, but it should give you an insight into how I go from concept to final design. So first and foremost, I'm working with Game Maker Studio. Now, there are a lot of different tools that you can use to program your game. Some of them are object-oriented scripting languages like Skira, Construct, which I tried for a good chunk of time, but ultimately ran into a lot of problems with even making something that could be released for PC with decent performance. And I won't go into the details of why I chose Game Maker Studio. Other than that, I will say, if you're thinking that, I'll just dodge programming so that I can just make stuff and get to the design part, you're really kind of hamstringing yourself. Unfortunately, there's no better way to program than to just learn to program. And it's not even that much harder than actually learning the object-oriented scripting language. It just seems more complicated. But watch a few tutorials, start with something simple, start with something basic, and just like learning to do anything, if you can stick with it because you love it and problem solve, you'll go far with it. But Game Maker Studio, even programming in that it is like a simpler programming language. It's mostly just sort of cause and effect, if this, do that, and setting states and listeners and reactions for different events that you want to occur between families or relationships between objects. And all that just must seem like a headache for somebody that's just an artist that just wants to, make their idea happen in a game. But if you want to make indie games, you're going to have to learn to do it because nobody else is going to do your vision. You might be thinking you could just hire a programmer. Well, I can tell you I've spent tens of thousands of dollars over the last 5 years to make indie games. And ultimately, if you're not paying top dollar, you're going to have a hard time finding programmers that are reliable. So you might as well just learn to do it yourself. It's not really that hard. So what I start with is really like a mock-up. I'll do kind of a stage breakdown. I've got my collisions, I have my objects, my main objects. And in this case, you'll see that I have a white ball out front and I have my ship set to follow that white object. That white object is actually invisible. I have the visibility set to 0, but what that does is it allows the arc of the ship to even out and always have the sort of player chasing after that ball. So it perpetually moves it forward along the gameplay stage. And then of course the dark blue areas are just collisions. That's their collision map. The white balls that are moving up and down, those are going to end up being air mines. And they're just really kind of objects to test out. Is it fun to fly through this stage and dodge through and weave through all of these white balls and collision boxes? Now, I learned a long time ago to not put too much time into your art assets until you're sure that the gameplay is enjoyable, that it's fun to run through this stage or play this stage. In this process is when I'm starting to look at the arc of the rockets that are chasing it. Like, do they have enough of an arc on them to turn? Or because I think at this point they were turning really quickly and then they would bolt after you. And I had to rethink that a little bit because it was just, they were too dramatic. And then they also weren't firing out of the cannon. So it just looked a little unbelievable. But also figuring out like how tight a corridor is, how fast do I want those mines to move? There was a lot of play testing in this stage to figure out, okay, do I feel like I'm getting narrow escapes? How close to an edge can I go before my ship explodes? I wanted to make sure that the player could maybe ding or like press against a flat surface, but if he caught an edge of something, there was a really good chance that it would explode. And really, this is when all the game design starts to get planned out, where I'm really figuring out like what is going to make this fun. One thing that was essential was making everything move forward to the right at a fairly good pace. I had tried some similar stages like this on an indie game that I was making years ago in an air balloon, and it just kind of felt like floaty and kind of boring. There was no tension. Because you're always being pushed forward to the right, there's always this feeling of like, oh my God, I have to move forward. I just have to decide where I want to position my ship vertically in the space of this stage. There was also a lot of considerations with how big to make the Javelin, how big to make the rockets, how big to make the mines. And I wasn't even really thinking about what the graphics were going to look like, other than that I knew it was probably going to feel like the exterior of a facility, or like you're flying over a jungle as you're approaching a facility, because that's what served the story. So once I've got something that feels like it's kind of fun, actually, it's enjoyable to play, I take a screenshot and then I drop it into Photoshop, and I try to match the grid into 32 by 32 pixel grids so that I can plan out my graphics as a tile set, a 32 by 32 tile set. And I'm not getting too much into the details in this initial pass. I really just want to mock something up. I want to make sure that I can create something that looks cool, because I know that it plays well. It's fun to play this stage, but can I make it look cool too? I reused a lot of the assets from the platforming segments of the game to create a lot of the solid structural elements, so that there's a direct relationship. The player will get a feeling that they're still in the same game world, but it is an exterior, more zoomed out kind of a space. So the trees are a little bit smaller, and a lot of the details are actually condensed down so that it feels like this is a much more distant shot of the same type of location, but not the exact location. Also making sure that I'm using the same sky colors and the same grass colors, and also making sure that the mines are a bright red. I wanted them to really pop out, and I added a little bit of a glowing pulse to them later as well. And also the trees kind of have a little bit of a unique art styling to them. They're a little bit more boxy and squared off. I wanted everything to feel like it was kind of a higher detailed pixel art. Even the trees themselves have a little bit of that in the Ikeda universe. It all feels very mechanical and almost pixel art, but it's a little bit more high res than pixel art. So I kind of get away with a few things that I probably wouldn't be able to if I was doing really low resolution pixel art, because the game actually is designed to be played in a 1080p kind of a display. I kind of wanted something in between a high resolution game and a pixel art game. I knew that I didn't have the bandwidth to do a high resolution game in my free time. You can't make an indie game part-time, like in your free time, unfortunately. That is of much more complexity than what you're seeing here. I was really surprised to find that Celeste was actually developed by a small team of just under 10 people, from my understanding, and it took them well over a year with that many people working full-time on it. So, doing something like even this simple, you can sit back and say, oh, well, it's not as cool as all these other indie games that have, that look simple and were made by 2 people. Well, that's not entirely necessarily true. A lot of times what you're sort of sold isn't really the accurate amount of time, energy, resources, or money required to make a game, especially if you're looking at Kickstarter and you're like, oh, that game was made by, one guy with $8,000 or something. Well, so a lot of times you're kind of getting sold a bill there that isn't very accurate. And if you want to challenge me on that, go ahead and show me your indie game. I'd love to see it in a couple of years when you're finally done. So with my process, the next thing that I would do is kind of test it after I've done all the mock-up and then I've made the tile set and then incorporated that into the game. And I'll do a little test to see how is it looking. I got some wind sweeping in there. It's a little bit bumpery, like bumper cars going on when you bounce into walls and things like that. So I realized I have to make some changes on that by this point. So after kind of testing it and feeling like I'm making some good progress, this is maybe like, I don't know, 2 or 3 days into the process of testing this particular stage. And then what I would do after this is start to do enhancements, such as fine-tuning some of the gameplay to make it a little less bouncy, and refining a lot of the artwork to make it feel like you're crashing into this facility. So I had to create a custom piece towards the end of the stage that looks more like the interior facility. This is a transition. So when you're going from the exterior, flying the Javelin, and into the next scene, it'll feel to the player a little bit more like, oh, okay, I get it. We're actually transitioning into this new location, and the architecture will feel familiar from the exterior shot that you just crashed into. Let me go ahead and drop that into the game editor in Game Maker Studio. throw a few mines in, and let's see how the final looks. So most of the game stages are actually more of like a kind of a platforming game like this, where you're dodging saws and that sort of a thing. So this is kind of a little bit of a departure from that to really kind of give you a break from those types of stages. And you'll see that the final version didn't change too much. There's a little bit more animation going on. I brought out the wind coming at you a little bit more. I added a checkpoint and a couple other little things like changing the arcs on the missiles, the rockets, so that they take a little bit longer to change their trajectory, which gives the player a little bit of a feeling that he's outrunning these things. And there should be a feeling of just death-defying action going on. And it's challenging enough, but also very satisfying when you finally complete the stage, I feel like. And I probably could have made an entire game like this, where you're just flying the javelin through these stages, barely surviving. But for the time being, I feel like it's a pretty good little extra stage that feels unique from the rest of the game. And I think the artwork turned out okay. The gameplay was kind of fun. So I don't know. What do you guys think? And with that, it looks like Ikeda the Scrap Hunter EP is done. That is the last thing that I really needed to do. The last thing, I guess, is cutting a trailer together. Of course, as you know, if you follow my channel, I'm doing my year of completing projects. This is one of those items on that list. If you'd like to play the Ikeda the Scrap Hunter EP, you can swing on over to my Gumroad channel, where it's at a very affordable price of only $2.50, but it gets you a lot of value for that. It might take you a solid 6 hours to get 100% complete. If you're really good, you can do it in 35 minutes. I mean, that's my speed, but I played it for 1,000 hours. Of course, if you'd like to pick up my tutorials or brushes or any of that stuff, got all that over there on my Gumroad channel. It certainly helps me out a lot. And dudes, I want to thank you so much for stopping by. You're the best. And I'll catch y'all manyan de bond. And ciao, baby. Oh, yeah. Play that Ikeda.